Thank you all for coming. I think that everybody's looking for a way to de-stress right now. This is a very difficult time for in our country and around the world, of course. We are so excited to always get out into our garden, and I am terribly excited that about our three speakers that we have today. It's a real treat. I've heard all three of them several times, and I've worked with all three of them, and each time I learn something new. So we have Kitty Ritz and Fred Jarvis, who are going to be talking about strawberries, and Steve Ehrman, who's going to be talking about fruit tree pruning. So this is a webinar this time rather than what we've done before. And so your audio and video will be off. I know that a lot of people were saying, hey, I can't get on, I can't see myself. It's because it's just set up a little bit different this way. There is a chat box and there is a Q&A box. So if you would put your questions in the question and answer box, that would be awesome. Instead of the chat box. So because we won't be monitoring that chat box. Our Zoom talk is being recorded. And so just to let you know. So we are Sonoma County Master Gardeners, and we are guided by a higher principle. So we want to make sure that we not only grow delicious fruits and vegetables for ourselves, our families, and our neighbors, but we want to make sure that we help the earth at the same time. So we start by trying to plant the right plant in the right place at the right time. And this goes for landscape plants and fruits and vegetables. We nurture and protect the soil above all else. The soil is where everything comes from, and we need to not take it for granted. We mulch to save water and prevent weeds because, you know, it's California, water is scarce. And those darn weeds, boy, they come in and they suck everything up so that our wonderful plants don't have enough water. We try not to use synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. We try to go the natural route. We try to do minimal soil disturbance. So you don't need a rototiller if you're following us. You just need to, make sure that you're protecting everything underneath the ground. We also plant flowers that benefit plants and beneficial insects, because they are terribly important to us. We need pollination. They're wonderful to have in the garden. We use compost and organic amendments to enrich our soil. Okay, so we are going to, first thing we're gonna talk, Fred Jarvis is gonna talk about growing berries in Sonoma County.
Yeah, our talk is organized to first have some general comments about growing strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries. And then Kitty's going to go into some specific helpful suggestions about how to plant the bare root strawberries. One of the things that's noteworthy is you can grow your own berries easily without I'm getting disrupted, without using pesticides. And I think that's fairly important. And the berries are fairly easy to grow if you meet a few specific requirements that they have. Put down here that they're fun to grow. I know that the berry outcome, eating the berries, is great, but also the whole process, being outdoors, getting your hands in the soil, kind of nurturing and admiring your plants as they change and grow each day. And then I think it kind of appeals to our kind of hunter-gatherer DNA, that you go out and look for them and then pick them. Next, please. So some of the basic growing requirements are full sun, which really means 8 hours a day, but you probably could survive with 6, somewhere in that range. You need sufficient water. All the berries require a fair amount of water, and we'll give more detail on the water later. we can't, none of us can control what type of soil we have. It could be clay, could be nice sandy loam, but if you have clay soil, it's really recommended that you work with it by adding organic compost and improving it, and that'll take some period of time to do. You want to use I use a lot of compost to try and improve the drainage of my soil. And you need to maintain and prune things. For maintenance, you want all your berries to be weed free because you don't want weeds competing for nutrients and water. And one detail I'll mention for strawberries, because we don't mention it later, is that, you know, within about 2 months after planting them, you're going to be getting the flowers on the little berries, and you want your berry plant to get vigorous. So you should pinch off those flowers for a month or so until you get about 5 or 6 leaves. Next, please. So these are kind of some of the things to consider. For the raspberries and blackberries, I do like to plant them in a north-south direction because the plants can kind of shade each other. The north-south direction, they have less of that. Strawberries, it really doesn't matter because they're so low to the ground, they're not going to shade anything. In terms of growing either in the ground or using raised beds, I've always planted the blackberries and raspberries in the ground on a raised row with lots of organic matter. The strawberries, I've always used a raised bed or a planter box, pot, half a wine barrel, something like that, because you have a little more control over it. Some of the factors I think about when I'm buying berries plants is I like the time of year. Some are early season, some are mid-season, some are late. And I also put some value on disease resistance because I have had some instances where I've had problems with disease. Next. So Kitty and I believe everyone should grow some strawberries in their yard. Our area is pretty well adapted to doing that. We'll go to next. And as we mentioned, you could grow them in mounds, raised rows, beds, pots. One of the important things is not to grow them where you've had the nightshade family, which is your tomatoes, your potatoes, peppers, and eggplant that had grown in the last 3 years. One year I planted chandlers where I'd grown potatoes the previous year, and all the plants wilted and died. So there was a fungal disease that had built up when I was growing the potatoes that affected the strawberries. And also I would avoid growing where I had previously grown the strawberries or raspberries or blackberries, because for the same reason, you could be having a disease that is built up in the soil. Now you're planting your new plants there and they can be affected. Let's go on to the next. We'll talk a little bit about the types and varieties. I mean, basically there are 2 types of strawberries. Like everything in life, there are all kinds of nuances, but we won't go into all of that. But the short day June bearing types of berries are very good if you want a lot of production in a short period of time. Our slide says 3 or 4 weeks. It could be 2 to 3 weeks. So if you wanted to process and make a jam, you get a lot of berries that'd be all there at once. Some of the varieties that the master gardeners have liked are the Chandler, which is a UC Davis variety. It can grow well in hot weather. There's the Sequoia, which is another variety that can grow well in hot weather if you're in the hot part of the county. The Chandler also grow in the moderate area too. And then the Rainier, which is a Washington State variety. Let's go on to the next. In the other main category of varieties are your day neutrals, which I enjoy quite a bit because I like just getting a few berries all the time, all through the late spring and summer. You know, you're gonna have some berries ripe. The Albion is a particularly, all 3 of the ones listed here, the Albion, Seascape, and Aramus are UC Davis varieties that were developed for commercial growers. The Master Gardener Handbook says of Albion, it's one of the finest strawberries in California. I know one of the Master Gardeners in a very hot area of our county said they didn't find it that helpful where it's really hot every day. One thing I like about albumin is it's very disease resistant. And also, one time on the day neutral, our local nursery had the Monterey variety, which is another UC type. It has a very nice flavor, and I enjoy that berry too. Let's go on to the next. This is an example of a raised bed. You could make beds out of cinder block or logs or all kinds of sorts of material. We say use a lot of compost, and you might say, how much is that? I personally would use about half compost and half native soil. Just put it in there and kind of mix it. You could use a little less, maybe a third compost. The top of the soil has been mulched with compost. That helps with minimizing weeds, making the soil a little cooler and helping to retain moisture. In a bed like this, oh yeah, we have these little lines that are 1/4-inch drip lines that you can see. There are 4 of them, and there's a little bare root strawberry planted near the emitter of each of those lines. So if you put the drip lines down first, you can tell that you're planting your bare root in the right spot near an emitter. And you can buy the emitters spaced 6 inches apart or 9 inches apart or 12 inches apart. The 6-inch type are the most flexible I found for lots of different garden use, and they really work very well. It's recommended to space your strawberries somewhere between 8 and 15 inches apart. Of course, if you're using the emitters, you'd be trying to get everything about 1 foot apart and be evenly spaced. For a bed this size, I did the arithmetic about how much water you would need. You would be somewhere, you'd need to have your drip on for somewhere round numbers between 5 and 11 minutes a day. 5 minutes would be comparable to 1 inch of water a week, and 11 minutes would be comparable to 2 inches of water a week. So it gives you an idea what you need. You want a few ounces coming out each emitter, making the root zone evenly moist. So I think we'll go on to Kitty getting details.
Hi, this is Kitty, and I'm going to talk about bare root strawberries because it is bare root season. And bare root season is generally in January and sometimes into February. So I love the picture on the left because it shows just what a happy plant can do. So this strawberry is probably being grown in strawberry paradise down near Santa Cruz or Salinas. And on the right, you will see that this is the Goldilocks picture of strawberries and bare root. So keep in mind that a bare root plant is a plant that is taken out of the soil for a while, but it still has roots. It may still have leaves. And the trick is to keep those roots moist so that the plant continues to thrive, because there's not too much photosynthesis going on right now anyhow. And when you're planting, you want to make sure that you keep that precious area that is not too deep, not too shallow, just right, and covered with soil, and that you don't cover the crown. Next, please. So if you go to your nursery or you order from a catalog and you bring your bare root plants home, they'll probably be in a plastic bag. Take them out and put them in a box of moist straw or coconut coir, which you can find at many nurseries, wet medium, that's not too wet, it's just damp. And you can cover up the roots with the straw. As a matter of fact, you can cover up the whole darn thing with the straw. Next. You need to trim those extra long fine roots off. And you will notice that on the left, you have old stems, you have a leaf, you have some scraggly little roots, and then you have some thicker roots. So be brave, take your snips, and trim those finest roots to 6 inches. Next. The story of this kind of strawberry bed, called a strawberry tower, is that in my small Santa Rosa garden, just a regular lot, I don't have a lot of room. And in order to rotate my fruits and vegetables, I have only 5 beds. Recently, I had an irrigation issue, and so I lost a bed and had to downsize my strawberry bed. So I thought I'd try this strawberry tower. And it is made of 3 grow bags. Each one is filled with soil. They're piled one on top of each other, and they have been filled with good soil, native soil. As Fred says, half of it is compost, and I always add worm castings to my plantings. So here in the bucket on the right is the bare root plant, just like you got it from the nursery. Next. Once again, planting depth is very important. So you can see the small leaves and the crown on the left, and coming off of that are the roots. So you've taken off all those old stems and runners. The soil should cover the fine roots, but not the main growing tip of the plant. Next. You should spread your roots out. It says vertically into the soil, and then they should spread out like a fan. So you want as much contact between soil and root as you can get. You want to water well, and of course you want to mulch. I prefer, especially for strawberries, compost mulch, and then in the hotter season, I always cover with straw. If you cover with straw, be mindful of slugs. And even when you're mulching, don't cover the crown of the plants. Next.
Kitty, you're at 10 minutes.
Okay, so here it is, voila, strawberry tower. And in my strawberry tower, I was able at my local nursery to obtain 3 different varieties. So the top is the Chandler variety. Hopefully I'll get a chance to see Juneberry strawberries. And then I have Seascape and Albion in the lower tiers. And this strawberry tower has a footprint of a diameter of 3 feet, and it's about 3 feet tall. So it's very small and would fit in most yards. I will be watering it just as Fred does with 1/4-inch tubing. And in most cases, strawberries need that 1 inch a week. This I've been checking every day, even though my berry plants looked dried out and sad when I got them from the nursery. By keeping them in the mulch, they stayed pretty happy, but when I put them into the soil, they really perked up. I think that's it. And these are resources that you can access. They are related to UC, and you can see that they are all science-based resources.
Yes,
Thanks.
We believe in science. So if you want to take a picture of this, that's great, or it will be available later as well. Okay, so now you may have heard Steve Ehrman speak other places. He's been all over. He's our go-to guy as far as fruit trees. And he's the first person that I call, isn't he lucky, with all of my questions. So I think we're very fortunate to have him here today. And this is a beginning guide to dormant fruit tree pruning. Okay, so.
Hello, everybody. So why prune your fruit trees? There's lots of good reasons to prune them. First of all, you get consistent yields. With an apple tree, for instance, it requires about 40 leaves to produce one apple. And if you've got too many apples and too little vegetative growth, you're not going to you'll have a lot of little tiny apples. So a lot of pruning can affect how much vegetative growth you have. It can also affect how much fruit you have. Apples and pears, for instance, grow on little clubby formations called spurs. Spurs get old. And so some of them you can cut off and reduce the amount of thinning that you'll have if you got by taking out some of the spurs. Invigorating your tree. Pruning is a form of invigoration. If you don't prune any kind of a plant, it eventually becomes senescent, and pruning it gives it vitality. Reducing tree height. It's very, very important to keep your tree low enough so that you can reach the fruit. Any fruit that is beyond your accessibility is going to go to the birds and the critters. Also, I don't think it's wise to be on ladders. Orchard ladders with three support positions are pretty stable, but still, it's not a great idea to be up on ladders. When you're spraying, if you're up high, a little breeze will send all the spray right back into your face. It's really unpleasant. So try to keep your trees low, and you do that by timely pruning. And once again, encouraging fruit spurs. With apples and pears, they grow on spurs. Stone fruit grow just along the length of last year's wood, or sometimes wood that's a couple of years old. So that is something you need to understand as you're pruning your tree. Where does the fruit come from? You have to rejuvenate those areas so that in the future you get more fruit. Next slide. When's a good time to prune fruit trees? Well, most people think of number 2 here, dormant season pruning. Dormant season pruning has an advantage in that you can see what you're doing. It's typically used for larger branches, cutting larger branches because the tree is asleep, or most trees are asleep, they've lost their leaves. Let's see, but summertime pruning has very distinct advantages. That's when you reduce the height of the tree and the consequence of pruning in the summer is that you steal back nutrition that has been generated by the tree in forming new branches and leaves. The less of those structures available, the less carbohydrates that the tree can develop through photosynthesis and then store in the trunk and in the roots for the following spring. So if you've cut the tree back in its height, you not only bring the height down, but you steal back some of the energy that the tree would have to produce more vigor in the future. One advantage of pruning also in the winter is for a tree that lacks vigor. If it has too many spurs and not enough vegetative growth, you can prune it back and force it to put out new growth. A tree should have at least 8 inches of growth along a branch a year. And if it doesn't, it has too little vigor. And sometimes it has 3 or 4 feet. So you have to balance between summer and winter prunings. When should you not prune a tree? Well, within 48 inches of rain and extra moisture, the pathogens, bacterial and fungal pathogens that can attack a tree are often able to penetrate pruning cuts, and they are prevalent in the cold, wet, rainy seasons, and especially toward the spring. That's when they attack plants. So when it's really wet, it's not a great time to be pruning. So that's another advantage of pruning in the summer, especially with stone fruit, where so many pathogens are really a serious threat. It's dry. Also, when a tree is first put out its growth in March and April, and early May, you shouldn't prune it. Wait for summer pruning till June and even a little later. Next slide, please. So, tools of the trade. On the left is a saw with a replaceable blade. It's a pull saw, a Japanese toothed saw that cuts very cleanly and efficiently, and it's very sharp. The major tool that you use is the single hand pruner in the center. And then above that is the two-handed lopper for larger branches. Lowest below the hand pruner is a carbide sharpening stick that is really very effective for sharpening the curved edge of both of those pruners. Next slide, please. It's a good idea to disinfect your cutting tool during the process of pruning, and certainly between trees. There are a lot of pathogens on trees, and as you're cutting out dead, diseased, and dying wood, that the contaminant takes up on your tool and you can spread it. It's much better to have a healthy tree that doesn't have pathogen infestation. It's hard for a tree to heal itself in the future. So if you use something like Lysol, which says it kills 99.5% of bacteria and fungi, it's good for keeping the tool purified between cuts. Next slide, please. Okay, so when you prune, it's really important to remove at any time of year that you can dead, diseased, and dying wood. When it's diseased wood harbors bacteria or fungi, and that spreads to additional parts of the tree. And so when you can remove it by pruning, it's a good idea. Also, you always remove fruit that dries up, called mummies. Mummies harbor fungi over the winter, so that's another thing to look for. Always eliminate the mummies, put them in a bucket and get them away from your tree, throw them in the recycling bin. You remove crossing branches because the wind will cause them to rub against one another, and that removes the bark. And then look for ways to let the light into the center of the tree. Fruit requires sunlight to ripen and develop good color, and leaves require light to photosynthesize to develop sugars. So if it becomes a dark jungle on the inside of your tree that has a lot of diseased branches, that's a good place to start and remove what you can to bring the light in. If you remove too much, you may want to paint branches with some 50-50 white latex paint, and I'll talk about that a little bit further on. And of course, to reduce the height of the tree so that you don't have to be up on the ladder. Thank you. Next step. How to make cuts. I have following pictures in the next slide, but branches you cut at a 45-degree angle just above the bud, and I have a good picture of bud. Do not cut into branch collar, and be careful of fruiting spurs. Don't remove all the wood that is going to produce the fruit in the following year, or you're not going to even have any flowers. And don't leave stubs. Stubs are portions of branches beyond a bud that does not have the ability to form new buds, and so it becomes food for fungi as they eat it away, and then they can eat below into the branch below it. Next, please. How to prune. Well, on the picture on the upper left shows a pear branch. I cut it at 45 degrees just above the bud that is facing outward from the center of the tree. You want the branches to grow outward, not inward, where they will be creating a thicket. That is called a heading cut. You're just bringing that branch down in height, but not cutting all of it off. The picture below it shows a ring of lightish brown color. That is from a thinning cut where you've moved the branch all the way down to its base of origin. The area around that brown is called the branch collar, and the cells within that collar are forming this light colored wood called callus, C-A-L-L-U-S. So this is very healthy in forming a seal over the wound. In the middle picture, there are a couple of examples of callus having formed and almost or completely forming over previous year's cuts.
Excuse me, Steve, you're at 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And then the cut below that, the fresh cut, shows some wrinkled wood below that. That's the branch collar. All the way over on the right, there is a red line shown in the area of a dead branch. That is a stub. All the area above the red is a stub. The fungus grew into that stub and is eating it away, but since the stub was left long above the branch collar, the fungus invaded below the branch collar and is now into the main part of the trunk. So a proper pruning cut would have eliminated that possibility. And then down in the rightmost corner, there's just another stub example. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a slide of wood in a cross cut, showing a good angle of a branch going off to the right at 45 to 65 degrees. And the one further to the right is a branch at a very, very tight acute angle. This is something you want to avoid. The acute angle with each yearly growth will form bark on the outside of its growth, and the bark it infuses inward in between that joint and creates a wedge that makes that attachment weak and vulnerable to breakage. Next, please. This is not the most common kind of format for forming a tree, but it's kind of in the shape of a Christmas tree. This is called a modified central leader or central leader format. You can see that the main branch it's cut initially at 2 feet, but with each successive year, a center leader is maintained up the center of the tree, and the main branches come off of the side. There are some horizontal stick things you can see called spreaders, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. But you can see from each year what needs to be cut off, and those are the dotted lines. Light is maximized in this kind of a shape format. As light comes down, it can access 360 degrees, and the leaves and fruit have optimum performance. Next slide, please. This is more common in tree shapes. It's called an open center format. Initially, the first tree was cut, bare root tree was cut at about 2 feet. Some branches were left. If you're lucky enough to have them below the 2 feet level, they're cut back as well to a bud, an outside bud. But you can see that the top has been cut off. That creates the beginnings of an open center. In the second year, it's kind of like a champagne glass and a wine glass. With each year, you keep the openness of the center of the tree for light and air circulation. You can see where the cuts are made, avoiding anything that's going toward the center. And the third year, more so. So you end up with a tree that has a short trunk and branches that open up to the outside with light remaining toward the center. Next. Here's another example. This has an open center format, and you'll notice that there are branches, there are boards pushing branches out so that they have a larger angle and a more open center. Some trees are extremely inclined to vertical growth, and they'll grow in a very tight format so that not a lot of light will get into the center. These the branches are rarely coming in at an optimum location and optimum angle. And by using spreaders, including when they're very, very little, this picture on the right of the clothespin, it works very nicely. As this delicate little branch comes out, you spread it away from the other branch with a clothespin. And then eventually, maybe you can use string holding it down from the ground or sticks to push these apart. You get the tree to be spread to be more open. Oh, also on the trunk, you'll notice the trunk has white paint. This is really, really important, especially for hotter areas and for young, vulnerable trees. If you've painted it with 50% latex, 50% water interior paint, which you can buy online pre-mixed, that prevents sunburn. Sunburn is extremely common on fruit trees and any ornamental tree that are grown in commercial building landscapes. And up in the upper branches, you can paint this white as well, where you get excessive sun. Next, please. Oh, this is my last slide. You'll notice it looks kind of unkempt. I first put down compost on the ground around the tree. Then I put a lot of cardboard, overlapping cardboard, and then I've started to put mulch. Ultimately, I will put about 4 inches of mulch over the cardboard. The most optimum mulch is ground up leaves and twigs. When the Davis tree maintenance group comes along and they form these big piles, if you can ever talk them into bringing it over to your house and dumping it, it's great. That mulch eventually will break down and become compost. The cardboard I use because it suppresses the weeds. Weeds compete with trees, with tree growth. And weeds on my property, that nice fluffy little green grass you see, can eventually be 4 or 5, even 6 feet tall on my property. So I have to put the cardboard down just to suppress the weeds. You'll notice too that it has a black circular irrigation line at the outside perimeter of the tree. It's very important to water trees. You see said daily, and if you don't do daily, maybe every other day, but trees require a lot of water. And if they're not given sufficient water, they get drought stressed and they'll never really perform well for you. I see more dead or weakened trees by people planting them and kind of walking away and not watering them on a regular basis. So if you're going to put trees in, please be prepared to have the irrigation set on a timer before you get the tree in there. And then as it dries out in May, just turn the timer on and run it for 10, 15 minutes a day. You have to do the calculations depending upon the size of the tree.
Steve, you're at about 2 minutes.
Okay, and we had one speaker from UC said that 85% of fruit tree issues are related to water. And I don't think that it's really appreciated enough how important irrigation is to fruit trees. For if they get underwatered, they will not prosper. And if they're overwatered, that can be a problem too, especially with heavy soils. Also, well, gophers are another problem, but that's another conversation. You'll have to keep on top of gophers if you have them because they will eat the roots of most trees that you have.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
One thing people might say, I see we have several questions and we're going to get to those in a second, is that, well, I have an apple tree that is huge and it's been, I don't water and it does just fine. But one thing I learned from Steve was that different types of trees, if you have standard size trees, they may eventually be able to produce fruit just on what they're getting, right, as far as the rain. But the smaller trees need more water. So could you just talk on that just a second?
The greatest yield you'll get from fruit trees is from very small trees, dwarf, or if you keep semi-dwarf trees very small, much more so than standard trees. And that's all determined by the rootstock. You look at the label when you buy a tree and it will tell you what kind of rootstock, dwarf, semi-dwarf, or standard. Standard trees grow to be huge. They have very extensive rootstocks, root systems, and in time you will not need to water them. They will find their own water. Some tree types require more water than others. Citrus and olives require 20% less water than an apple or a pear type. If you've got dwarf apples or dwarf of any tree, they require a constant water because they have very short fibrous roots and they are not able to attract or seek out enough water with those small root systems. So please water your dwarf trees daily and keep a nice thick mulch on them so that what you do, water will not evaporate.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to do some question and answers. And I'm going to go through and stop my share here. Okay, let's see. So, and we do have resources. So I have a couple of resource slides after this that I'd like to pull up so that you know where to go for more answers. Okay, so all righty. So Kitty, here's a question for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
This person says, I planted strawberries last year. Any suggestions for getting another crop out of them this year?
Oh, strawberries are perennial and you will have them for more than 1 year. Only commercial growers replace their plants every year. So you should, and I know people who have the same strawberry bed for prolonged periods of time, your best yield is probably in the second and third years. So compost, compost, compost. Renew your bed by adding compost every year.
Perfect. Okay, and there's another question about what sizes are the grow bags? And I think you said that the biggest one that had a diameter of 3 feet, right? So
Right.
Okay. And did you
And as they get smaller as you go up, and that particular setup came as a unit, but in researching different places where grow bags are available, I've seen lots of grow bags that would be appropriate. That was not my dream strawberry tower. My dream strawberry tower would have been lovely rocks or nice bricks or lovely redwood, but that was the tiniest little space. So it could have been half a wine barrel with a smaller pot inside, that. It's just the idea of going up instead of out. Perfect.
Okay, so Fred, here's a question for you. What time of year should we refurbish or thin the old strawberry beds?
Well, obviously you don't want to do it when they're bearing fruit. the winter time would be a good time to try to rejuvenate your strawberry growing bed. I sometimes have a mother strawberry plant that's getting 2 or plus years old and it's not looking too vigorous. And I'll remove it and I'll put a few new bare roots in, kind of mix some of the old and new. Also, you can prune all the leaves that look kind of sad, and maybe some of them have leaf spot or other things, kind of clean it up. I've read where you could kind of run a mower over it. I think that's a little drastic, but you could take a pair of scissors and use your Lysol and kind of clean it all up. And, with this weather that'll be turning towards spring like pretty soon, it'll do well.
Okay, Steve, here's your favorite question. Okay, he loves this question. He lives in Sebastopol, so he deals with this. Gophers mostly, but how do you protect your fruit from mice and rats? Do you have the answer?
Mice and rats. I don't know if mice are so much of a problem, but rats are a huge problem. I trap rats. I'll tell you a little story. I had a rat in my garage 2 weeks ago and I didn't get on him in time. He chewed through 3 quarts of motor oil, the plastic. He chewed through a root hormone bottle that was perfumed, and he chewed through a cabinet into my backpacking equipment and chewed up my precious beloved backpack. So, I think the rats come, maybe neighbors have chickens. I don't know that, or people have ivy and ivy attracts snails. But if you have rats, I would put, use those vector traps. Rats love feta cheese and they love like goat cheese. Rats no longer go for peanut butter for me. But you have to make sure that nothing else is going to get snapped by them. So maybe make a cardboard box with a little opening where they'd go in there. They could smell that cheese and they'll go in there and get whacked. And in terms of mice, you might be talking about voles. Put a screen mesh around up to 8 inches around all of your trees. If you've painted it heavily with white, that helps. They don't like to chew through that. But I went out there at the end of this summer and I had 3 trees chewed up by voles because I got kind of negligent. And over the years, I was on top of it and I kind of got distracted. And the fruit trees are completely girdled up to about 8 inches. Some of these new ones. Yeah. So that does work. Put a mesh around them and they won't chew through it. They don't like to be up above that because they're vulnerable to predators.
It is that is a huge problem with all food gardening, I think, is trying to keep some of it for ourselves. So, okay, here's another question for you, Steve. And, Steve is also part of the Rare Fruit Tree Growers Society group, and they have a scion exchange that's coming up at the beginning of February, and they do a lot of talking on some real specific things for bare root trees. So this sort of dovetails into that, but you might look for that for more information is in addition to our site. She says, do I really need to cut a new fruit tree down to 2 feet? Sounds like me.
The reason that people don't do it sometimes is because they have deer and they want to keep their tree elevated, or if they want to have a rider mower and get the rider mower to be underneath the tree. The reason that it is done is that you want to balance shoot and root, so that even with a modified central leader, that first cut is about 2 feet. And with a pear, it'll automatically put in the subsequent year another vertical shoot. With an apple, it'll be at an angle, and then you train it with a stick to be more vertical. But the reason you do it is to balance shoot and root. And a bare root tree has very, very little roots. So it is found that the fruit development is more successful earlier if you do that cut. And in terms of deer, oh my God, I've never had deer before. And I think because of the fires, they've all come down from the mountains. I counted 8 deer outside my yard yesterday. And now I'm challenged by this. I got to figure out how to put a fence around my entire random kind of orchard rather than this wire hoop around each one, which is really unpleasant to work around, unpleasant to prune and to pick, getting into this wired contraption.
Okay, so let's see. Fred, here's a question for you. I don't have drip irrigation for strawberries. So since I water by hand, how often should I water?
Well, you at first have to point out that you really don't want to water by hand, because getting water on the leaves, the crown, or the flowers is going to make it vulnerable to a lot of diseases. Try a soaker hose with a timer. You know, they have these timers that can let you develop you may not have the formal drip, but it'll work. It can function. You could have soaker hoses and have it on a timer for 5 or 10 minutes. I think it's really a bad practice to try to do it by end of a hose without having a soaker hose down near where the plants are, or some other way of doing it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that, you know, if you get those berries wet, it not only attracts, you know, all the little ground critters, but they rot. So, okay, let's see. I am looking, we have so many great questions. Kitty, do you cut heritage berries to the ground every year?
We're talking raspberries.
Okay.
So heritage, Fred, help me.
Well,
Are they summer bearing or?
they're the fall bearing. You don't have to, if you want to, you could cut them to the ground and they'll produce a new cane this year, and that cane will have fruit up on the tip, you know, August, September, October, somewhere in there. Or you can just cut off the part that fruited last year, and then earlier in the year, the lower part of that cane will have fruit. You know, maybe it'll be in June or July, and you'll have new prima canes that will have fruit later in the year. So I personally do a little mix of both, just so I'll have some fruit at different times during the summer and fall.
And we do have a whole dog and pony show on all of the berries. And so, you know, we may be working some of these others in. They're all just wonderful. Okay, Steve, here's a great question for you. On the pruning slide that shows the second year spring pruning, it looks like most of the previous year's growth is pruned off. Is that correct?
Well, it depends on the tree type. With apples and pears, you remove about 20% a year. With peaches, you remove 50% or more every year, because you need to rejuvenate the wood, and the wood that it bears on is reddish colored. So you have to understand where the fruit is coming from. With peaches and nectarines, it's on 2020 wood for 2021's fruit. For apples and pears, you have older spurs. So you can over prune. If you over prune in the winter, you'll cause more vigor, but you'll also perhaps remove fruit potential. After a number of years, then it becomes more possible that you'd be removing too much fruit potential. So,
Okay.
you know, it's something you have to play with and be very cognizant of when you're pruning, to see where the fruit is forming and how much you're taking off and how the tree is responding.
And let's see, any of you could answer this question. Let's give it to Kitty. When disinfecting your pruners, is it sufficient to just spray it, or do you need to spray and wipe?
Oh, technical question. I can only speak from personal experience, and I hope everybody else chimes in. I tend to spray, and that's it. Anybody else?
Steve?
Someone once told me to spray and let it sit. Well, this was hydrogen peroxide, let it evaporate a bit, but I spray and I cut. I do not wipe off and I don't wait a long time.
Yeah.
Fred, you agree?
Well, those are fine. I happen, sometimes it's hard to find what you want at the store, and I bought Lysol wipes. So it was really convenient just to wipe it. And I
That's,
like that.
I have to say, I do have a clean cloth out there, and especially when I'm pruning, if I have any diseased branches or anything that looks not right to me, I do have something clean. I spray it and I wipe it off in between. And like Steve said, if you have something like that, you want to make sure that you're cleaning off between branches, so you're not cutting the next one that has no problem, and then passing all of those issues on. Okay. Okay, Fred, are there any particular tree leaves that you should not use as mulch around the trees, like oak tree leaves?
I would defer to one of the other people here. I don't have
Okay.
background.
I think oak it breaks down slower, correct, Steve? I usually just take my deciduous tree leaves, I scoop them all up and crush them, and then I use them as mulch. But I don't do the oak leaves, which I have a lot, because well, I mean, and I also do have a Phytophthora on my property in the bays, so I don't want to spread that. Any input?
Well, as I say, the best thing that you can get for mulch is chopped up leaves with the wood. If you get wood only, it's very, very, very persistent. The leaves help give some nutrient to the bacteria and the fungi to help break down the wood. I have nothing against oak leaves. They carry a lot of mycorrhizal spores, and certain trees may benefit from that particular variety of mycorrhizal fungus. But I know of no negative reason to from using oak. And there is some thought that the cellulase that is used to break down, the enzyme to break down cellulose, can also attack Phytophthora. So I have heard zero negatives about using 3-4 inches of mulch. And the leaves are, to me, beneficial because they help the whole process along. Then you don't have to add compost. This becomes compost.
Perfect. Okay, we have a lot of questions. I'm going to go back, though, and share my screen one more time because I want to make sure you get the resources. And let's go like this. I can't have that up. Okay. And play. There we go. Okay. If you want to go through and capture this, if you have one of these readers, it's a QR code. This will lead you directly to our resources. Now, here are some more resources also. And I put on their YouTube channel. We have Sonoma County Master Gardeners have a YouTube channel. Steve has done a couple of really awesome ones. He has one on sharpening tools. And he has a couple on pruning, summer pruning. And boy, I tell you, before you do your summer pruning, and if we still are on this format, we'll have him come back in the summer. Just watching those videos, it's very helpful. One thing I learned to not cut is the fruit spurs. It's really disappointing when you cut them off. And one year I did cut too far. I don't know. Can you see the fruit spurs in there well enough, Steve, to point them out? There was a question on
in the photo. You've got this little branch that's coming out about an inch. Those are the beginnings of apple spurs.
Okay.
They will develop into little clubby kinds of formations, and each spur hole has 5 flowers. and that particular little branchlet.
Perfect. That's awesome. Can we take a few more questions? Is that okay, Stephanie, or are we being booted off at 1:30?
We are not being booted off. It's up to the attendees if they would like to stay with us for a little while longer.
Okay, so if your question hasn't been answered, if you could stay just a little bit longer, I will make sure that your question gets answered. Okay, let's see. Did I get my questions up here? Okay, one question I know was about strawberries, and is it okay to use fabric cloth under the strawberries? Pros and cons. Who would like to answer? Kitty?
The cons of fabric cloth are that it's a pain to deal with after you've set it up. It is the way that commercial growers like to grow their strawberries because it keeps the berries off of the ground, and it is a mulch and it is effective. However, cloth is a term I would use loosely because it's plastic. So I have tried to remove all of the fabric cloth that I put into my garden 20 years ago. And I avoid it. I would much rather have mulch. Straw keeps your fruit off the ground. Plus, you get to go outside every day and visit those little baby berries.
Okay, so here's a question for you, Steve. Maria asks, does the wood spreading trick work on non-fruit trees? And should you do that? I added that part in.
For mulch?
No, the wood spreaders, the spreaders.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The slide with the bark inclusion, that can be taken out of a book for all kinds of trees. It's interesting in nature, I've got them out on my property, a big leaf maple. It forms these really tight crotches. Coast live oak, the same thing. And eventually those big branches will split away. But yes, you can do that on all kinds of trees and branches. It's good for the tree to increase its angle for the strength of the branch.
Perfect. Here's another question for you. What time of year should we compost or fertilize our fruit trees?
Well, you can compost whenever convenient. For me, I had to get the compost and the cardboard down because once those grasses start, if I don't get on top of them, they are so high that it becomes a huge problem. So I started doing that in early December. It is recommended, and this is new to me, that you fertilize stone fruit for the first number of years. Stone fruit are extremely vulnerable to a pathogen called bacterial canker or Pseudomonas syringae. It's extremely lethal. It kills cherries. I wouldn't even recommend you grow cherries in Sebastopol area anymore. Very few people are successful at it. And so fertilizing, you would do it with all plants when the growth just is initiated, or unless you have a slow released time fertilizer like Osmocote, then it kind of releases all the time.
And also for peaches that need to be sprayed for peach leaf curl, do you prune before or after spraying?
Well, if you've pruned early, because your first spray is supposed to be Thanksgiving interval, beginning of December, and that is classically too early for a dormant spray, for a dormant pruning. But the more you've cut off, the less pathogen you've got available, and I would remove those branches that have been cut off. So yes, I would prune early. And when you spray for this year, I've started with Bordeaux mix. It's what UC recommends. It's a little bit of a scientific experiment to use it. but hopefully it's effective against peach leaf curl because much is not.
Okay, I know. I got some, my peaches are teeny tiny right now, but they're supposed to be resistant to peach leaf curl. We'll see. So far, no problem. Fred, can they use alcohol for spraying the pruners? Is that okay?
Yeah, I've used the isopropyl alcohol for that. That's fine.
That's okay. Great. Okay. So any concerns if they get free wood chips from tree trimming companies? I know you said, Steve, that you know, have them come by. I know other master gardeners have them, you know, drop off loads. Any thoughts, any of you?
I took a class at Santa Rosa JC in plant pathology, and Bruce Hagen, who's a forester, stated that it is not a problem.
Okay. I know you tend to wonder. Let's see. Any specific, oh, here, we've done this, Steve. Any specific advice about pruning a mature fig tree?
Figs are an open invitation to the hatchet man. You can prune them extremely aggressively, and you don't even have to prune to a bud. You can leave stubs on a fig tree because they've got all kinds of latent buds in the cambium all the way along. A big tree can be pruned extremely aggressively. It can be kept as a big tree. It could be kept as an espalier. It could be kept as a small bush. You can prune them very, very aggressively. I think that I don't have figs. I'm not a big lover of figs, and gophers love them more than I do. They're a huge, huge problem, gophers. There's something about if you prune it and you got too much white milky exudate, that's kind of a hint that it's not the right time to prune them. I think that would be in a warmer season.
Thank you. This talk will be recorded and it is going to be available on our website and I believe YouTube. It eventually ends up on YouTube. So, okay, let's see. And, you know, we probably won't get to all of your questions, but please, please, please visit our website. And, you know, I would suggest there's lots of things that are happening right now on fruit trees. Fruit trees are it's such a big, big topic. Steve, one more. When is the best time to prune persimmons? They're just they still have fruit on a lot of them now, right? I mean, some.
You can do persimmons both in the dormant season and in the summertime. Persimmons, the fruit develops. 2021 fruit will develop on little nubs from 2020's growth, but it's all on new wood. So what I would do, I don't have a persimmon tree. I think that by law, there should be only one per neighborhood.
Hey.
I mean, friends, you'll run from friends who have persimmons, right? You only need about 10 a year, but I'm biased opinion. I like them, but not in small quantities. So I would prune some sections back aggressively and see what happens. I think if you're too aggressive, you will lose fruit production from the following year from that area that you pruned that was too aggressive. But I would try to keep your persimmon lower. I would use an open-centered format rather than the modified central leader where they grow up to be 30 feet tall and nobody can get the fruit except for the crows.
And I have to say, we have a new, we are master gardeners. We have a new program that's being started in our county that's, well, it's other places, obviously. It's called Master Food Preservers. And we are we've just been trained and we're getting online. There's a small group of us. So eventually you will have resources on how to preserve your food as well. And I tell you, persimmons, I love the Fuyu persimmons. But I dehydrated persimmons this year, and I tell you, I was going to bring some to put in my little display. None left. They're all eaten. They're absolutely delicious. So, okay, let's see. All right.
We might want to wrap this up in the next 5 minutes because we'll be over long for most of our attendees.
Okay, that sounds great. So I don't know, maybe I should go back. Let me go back and give you that, the page again, if I can get to it. It looks like I lost it for our resources. We have the website, Sonoma County Master Gardeners. We have a Facebook page. We have the YouTube site as well. And if you capture that QR code, that has been changed to include some resources that will help you on this. Right now, I think I've seen 3 other places that are doing talks on fruit tree pruning. So take a look and see what you can find. It's a process. I have all these fabulous folks that know what they're doing, and the luxury of having, hey, Fred, come over to my house and see what am I doing wrong here. But it just takes a lot of time as far as learning to prune and doing a little and making sure you get, your diseased wood out is super duper important. And like Kitty and Fred said, we need to have, everybody should be growing a few little strawberries. They are absolutely wonderful, delicious, and easy to grow. And right now you can get those bare roots. Generally, this is the time, and they are cheap. So, and they just grow up beautifully. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And join us next month for new topics.